we're going to jump into bundles and assemblies, demand planning. How do you figure out what components you need and when? If you're new to Inventory Planner or new to our webinars, I'm Jill. Basil is up next. Stu is also on the line here, so you've got a full crew here. I'm going to turn it over to Basil, who's going to walk us through setting up accounts and getting into demand planning for bundles and assemblies.
All right, everybody. So we're going to dig in. We've recently rolled out some very exciting updates as it relates specifically to assemblies and just the overall design of how bundles and assemblies are configured. You're going to see some nice updates. I'm not sure if we have any poll questions actually in the queue today, but I'll be curious just to know who's familiar with the with this tool so far, who's been using it, and yeah, just I'm curious who's brand new to this and who's experiencing the improved design with us. And something to keep in mind: if you have been planning assemblies with us, you have not automatically shifted to the new assemblies environment. It needs to be done by request. So if you like what you're seeing today and you want to shift over to the new assemblies design and you haven't done so yet, make sure you reach out to us so we can make that change. All right. Now, if you've connected your store, then the first thing you see, of course, is your overview page. You can always log in from inventoryplanner.com to our demo store. If you're still just in an exploratory phase or anything, you'll see at the top right here, I went straight to our integrations page, but you'll see our demo store up there in the top right. You could certainly play with these features anytime in there as well and do whatever you can to break it. When you do log in to your store and you're taken to this overview page, the first thing I'm going to show you over here is the catalog section. This is a section we rolled out a few months ago. It's a library of information, of relationships, of vendors, all kinds of good information. And what we've done is we've split out these concepts of bundles and assemblies. They used to be kind of in the same family, and now they are by design treated separately. Bundles is the simpler concept, so I'm going to start there. All right, so bundles are commonly referred to as kits, as kitting, as gift sets, right? These are different ways of selling the exact same stock. So for example, maybe I sell 5-pack t-shirts and we also sell individual shirts. It's all one big pile of inventory. Let's say I have 100 total shirts. It's the same exact thing as saying I have 25 packs. If a customer goes to my store, buys a 5-pack, then the individual stock is 95. It's always tied together. We call them virtual bundles because the stock is truly tied together. At the time of the sale, and then once it's being fulfilled, we grab those 5 shirts and we send them out, and the stock needs to be adjusted for both. So that is the simpler relationship. That relationship can be configured through Inventory Planner. So if you sell the 5-pack, it's the same exact thing as selling 5 individual shirts, right? That will be how the relationship's going to work. What we will not do, and to be explicit about this, is that we do not adjust the stock of bundles or components based on customer orders. So in that specific example, customer buys a 5-pack of t-shirts. We're not reducing your individual stock to 95, okay? This is something that would either be handled through your inventory management system, or if you're coming in directly through your e-commerce platform, you can find an app in your marketplace that can assist with this exact function. Shopify customers in particular, you can use something called the Bundles app and connect it to Inventory Planner for free. The app is designed exactly to do that. You sell the 5-pack, it adjusts the stock of the components down by 5. You connect that to Inventory Planner for free, and the work is done for you in terms of configuration. We will have seen the relationships, and you're good to go. Basically, you'd come over to catalog, you'd see bundles in here automatically. You continue to maintain it in the Bundles app, and you're good to go from that perspective. If you're trying to figure out, based on your system and what kind of relationships are coming through, you can always also come over to our homepage. Actually, that page that I was showing you, the integrations tab there, you'll notice most of the inventory management systems. So you can click on any of the systems here, right? So you can click on any inventory management systems or any e-commerce platforms. And this would just give you an idea. Let's say if I'm just going to grab a few here. One works, sure. And if you were to scroll over to the right, this is a super useful cheat sheet to give you a sense of what kind of information we're bringing in from your platform. You'll see one here for bundles and assemblies. If there's that green check mark, it means that if you've set up the bundle assembly relationship in your connected platform in Sin 7 or Deer, Linworks, for example, then we would see those relationships automatically in Inventory Planner. You're also going to see a little info bubble next to some of these inventory management systems, because some APIs actually let us even know if it is a bundle or an assembly. Again, two different concepts. I'm going to talk about the assemblies piece here. But essentially, for some systems like Linworks, we'd see the relationships, but you need to classify if it's a bundle or an assembly. But we'll see the components that are attached to it. You just need to classify that relationship. Whereas some systems, it's very straightforward. We see exactly how it's configured and bring that over. But you would notice most of the e-commerce platforms, if you were to grab some of these here, let's do Shopify, notice most of them do not carry that kind of information. But we even show you there, the Shopify users, if you use that bundles app by Gazebo and then connect it to Inventory Planner for free, then we could actually get all of that automatically, which would be a nice headache saver for you.
I could just jump in really quick with a question here that Mike has. So he's asking for a little bit of clarification on what's the benefit of tracking bundles in Inventory Planner if the inventory isn't synced across to the source item?
Yeah, I mean, the key part is really just forecasting, and I'm gonna come back and dig deeper into it, but just to cheat and come over to replenishment, you see that individual shirt, click into that details icon for the individual shirt. Notice the breakout you're gonna see where you see sales in the form of 5-packs or sales on their own. We're merging all of those sales together. You can see the bundles production tab here. We can see exactly how many sales came from 5-packs and how many sales on their own. So all of that is coming in automatically. We're merging those sales to the component level. We're going to produce a forecast off of those merged sales to make sure that you're ordering enough to cover your demand through individual shirts or 5-pack shirts in that example, right? So it's super useful in that way. It's just that stock management piece in general, Inventory Planner is just not adjusting stock based on customer orders in general. We're just, that needs to be handled through your store or through an inventory management system. We're not going to make presumptions and adjust your actual physical stock based on those customer orders. For us, it's just important to see the relationships so we understand when bundles are sold or when produced goods, assemblies are sold, how does it impact the replenishment analysis of individual components? So it's a pretty critical piece in terms of setup and replenishment planning, but that's why we like to be explicit about that specific piece with virtual bundles / kitting. If you sell one good, if the customer buys one thing, then the stock still needs to get managed for the other. It's just a little gap fill that needs to take place there. Anything you want to add there, Jill?
Nope, I think you covered it. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Back in catalogs, we talked a little bit about bundles there, and we're going to dig in a little more with the forecasting piece. I'm going to talk a little bit about what assemblies are. And essentially, so assemblies are a little different. These are produced goods. So these are goods we have to produce and put them together to place them into stock and say that they're available for sale. The stock of components is totally separate from the stock of the assemblies. That is the finished good. Straightforward example would be your office table. This will be one of the forecasting examples that I walked through today. So we sell large office tables, and in order to produce large office tables, we have to grab 4 table legs so we can define that quantity, and we need a large tabletop. And so we will use, we'll see the past sales of our large office tables. We're going to come up with forecasted needs for the large office tables and a replenishment recommendation with that in mind. You will actually configure the assembly time, assuming, like, let's say you have those components all ready to go. How long does it actually take to assemble? We're going to walk through that. But basically, you will configure that assembly time. We'll use the forecasted sales and replenishment recommendation with that in mind to figure out how many office tables do we need. Then we'll go to the components and say, all right, we need this many table legs and this many tabletops to satisfy that assembly demand. Then, as a second layer, we will check if table legs and tabletops sell on their own. In this case, they would not, right? I mean, that's pretty unlikely. Maybe they do, but we do see that in a lot of cases that, maybe the components are also sold on their own. So basically, yeah, we're going to use the sales, the replenishment analysis of the produced good to inform the way we order components from our vendor. We'll receive those components in eventually. And then we can separately give you recommendations for assembly orders. These are production orders. It's ordering assemblies out of component stock. So it's increasing the assembly stock and decreasing the component stock. So it's two different layers, whether we're creating purchase orders for components from the supplier, or if we're creating assembly orders to turn component stock into assembly stock. So you have two layers. It's just breaking down every part of that process, since the stock is not all tied together. You certainly, so Greg, I do see your answer here. I'm gonna go ahead and answer it live. Yes, you certainly can create purchase orders for components. That's exactly how that will work. We'll give you forecasted needs and replenishment recommendations for the finished goods. And then we'll tell you, okay, we need to allocate this much component stock for office tables. And we'll say basically, based on your existing component stock, go ahead and produce 5 tables now, and then order another 100 components from your supplier. And then we'll give you that opportunity to create the PO for the components, receive those components in, so you can produce more office tables. So certainly it's a very key part of that process, is creating purchase orders for components. But we also give you that opportunity to create assembly orders from your existing component stock, and to understand above and beyond what you already have in stock in terms of components. What else do you need? How many additional components do you need for future assembly orders when we can get that new component stock in? All right. And yeah, Jill, Stu, if you guys have anything to add, if you feel something can be a little clearer, please don't be shy to jump in. I know this can be a little bit of a complex area, and I've spent just an unbelievable amount of time in here with assemblies, so I don't want to oversimplify anything either. One really nice thing too about assembly or bundle relationships is that you can configure what's called nested assemblies. So what I mean by that is simply, you can see, for example, we sell 10-pack cookies. It's made of 10 individual cookies. Well, we can even drill down further. We need flour to build cookies, and we can go even further. So bulk flour. So basically, as we come up with replenishment recommendations for 10-pack cookies, we'll figure out how many cookies we need to set aside to satisfy that demand. And we'll also check if cookies sell on their own and come up with a forecast. We'll use all of that to inform a replenishment recommendation for cookies, and continue to distribute that, repeat that sequence down for flour. So your sales from 10 packs and cookies would impact then your need for flour, right? All of that would push together.
All right, we have a question here. So Mike is asking, if my inventory integration recognizes bundles as manufactured goods, do I need to create bundles or assemblies, or will either work? So it's going to be important that you recognize it correctly as either a bundle or an assembly. So if it's a manufactured good, something that takes some assembly time, where the stock is distinct once it's put together, that's going to be an assembly. As Basil was explaining with the t-shirt example, if it's all the same pile of inventory, it's the same bin location in your warehouse that you would go to pick either the 5-pack when it sells or the individual t-shirt when it sells, those are bundles. So that virtual bundle grouping, those will be bundles. So I think, depending on what your platform does, just make sure in Inventory Planner that those are reflected correctly. Some platforms, as he was pointing out, will bring those all in as either a bundle or an assembly. So take a look at that and see if you need to do some sorting with an Inventory Planner to make sure those are categorized correctly. Basil, anything to add to that one?
Yeah, I mean, basically, if your inventory integration recognizes bundle component relationships, we're going to see them automatically. And that's where you should refer to this table on our integrations page to see if that's something that we can get from your system. I don't know why that toolbar always wants to shift over there, block everything. So it's something to check if your system does, if we can get that information automatically from your system. And then check these little info bubbles. There's just a few select systems where we can already see the quality of if it's bundle or an assembly. If we don't, so say you're coming through Unleashed or Linworks, we'll still see, okay, we know that these are either bundles or assemblies, and we know that these are the components, and then you can quickly and easily from the catalog, you'll be able to grab items and use bulk actions, and you'll see an option here to set them as bundles instead, so you can easily convert between the two. So that's basically the idea. And yeah, and then if let's say we've had customers too who maybe you use Sin 7 or something, and as a workaround you have your assemblies configured a specific way or your bundles configured a specific way. you can always reach out to us if you just prefer to manually manage those relationships in our system, but we're always going to try to reduce the headaches of that configuration. We'll get as much as we can automatically when it's available. And then when it's not, we'll give you, so basically, yeah, if we can, we will get all of the bundle component relationships and assembly component relationships. We'll see exactly what they are if we can optimally get all of that information right from the API. There's only a few integrations where that's the case. I think about 5 of them in the total list. The next step would be if we can't get the quality of it, we're going to see the relationship and you'll have to classify the type if it's a bundle or an assembly. And then if we don't get any of it, then you just configure all of that manually. You could import bundle component relationships, assembly component relationships. You can easily convert bundles to assemblies, et cetera, and manage those relationships within the tool. So yeah, that's the question. Mike, there's another question. If an assembly component is also sold on its own, will we see the same kind of sales info as we do with bundled items? The answer is no. Bundles work differently, right? So single shirts, 5-pack shirts, you're going to see all the sales at the individual shirt level. That's how bundles will work by definition. If you see any past sales and forecast information, in the case of an assembly, it means for the component, it means that the component is also sold on its own. Any information you'd see at the component level in terms of past sales and forecasted sales would represent how that component sells on its own. In the case of assemblies, it'll make sense once we dig in a little bit here, but you're going to see basically we always do a forecast. It's like a 2-step sequence. We do a forecasting and replenishment analysis for the assembly. We figure out how many components we need to allocate for that, and we represent it in a metric that is actually stock allocated for assemblies. Then we'll separately look how do components sell on their own, produce a forecast and replenishment analysis based on just how components sell on their own, and then just add the stock allocated for assemblies, and then basically net that out of your current stock plus what's on order. That would be the recommendation. So it's not the same workflow, but you'll see an example of that should help.
Well, I can jump in on the next one. Greg is asking if you use Shopify and they buy blanks and print on those blanks, how do they set those? They currently have them set up as products and variants. How do they change as assemblies? So you can definitely set those up as assemblies, as Basil is showing here within the catalog, within Inventory Planner. Taking a step back, I think for Shopify stores, if you're buying blanks and you're kind of printing to order, print on demand, I would recommend checking out that bundles app. I put it in a link to that in the chat, so you can check that out. I think that's the best overall solution. One, because it's managing your stock level of blanks. So every time you're selling, this print, this print, this print, if they're all going to the extra small gray blank shirt, as an example, it's decreasing your stock appropriately. That bundle can also be reflected within Inventory Planner so that you have all of those relationships already set up within Inventory Planner. So the demand for A, B, and C items that you're selling is showing as demand for the blanks altogether. So I think in terms of operations, not needing to kind of minimal setup and maintaining your stock levels, that using the bundles app is going to be a great way to go for print on demand when you're buying the blanks from those items. All right.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll walk through configuring a bundle here in a moment, but basically you'll have 2 methods. So let's say, if you had like the individual shirt and then a component of that is your blank t-shirt, you could either have a hidden product in your Shopify store and you set up that relationship and you use the bundles app. So we just see all of that automatically for the blank shirts, even though it's a hidden product. So it wouldn't show up in your store, but we'd see it, no problem. The other option would be creating an IP variant, Inventory Planner variant. It would only live in our system and the same relationships would apply. So that would only live in here. You could use it to create purchase orders and whatnot. And we would distribute the sales from the 5-packs or the individual shirts down to the blank. And then you could set the IP variant stock within Inventory Planner. And it's an exception case. Then if you create a purchase order and you receive the stock, it would increase the stock automatically because the item only lives in our system. So it's just a little bit of a different workflow, but that is something that you could do as well. And we'll walk through an example of that happening here. And then Anne, sorry if I've mispronounced your name here. Actually, I'm glad you asked that question. What I recommend to everybody would be as you go in and you're configuring, is coming down to that chat widget and just search for the bundles article here in the box. I already have it open, but actually this is a question that's come up before, just about in terms of KPI reporting. When you sell bundles, how do we represent it with components? We'll just scroll all the way down to the bottom of this article. I wasn't really sure where actually to add this in the article, and the organic place to put this was in this additional tips area. But basically, you're going to see understanding revenue when using KPI reports. What we do is we see the revenue from the bundles, and then we're assigning it down to the components proportionately based on the components' retail price. If the components don't have a retail price, then the revenue is assigned proportionately to the component quantities in the bundles. So if you don't set a retail price in inventory planner, so that would be one of those things. If you are creating a hidden product in your store or anything, then just you could still set a retail price there, and so we can see it and then assign that revenue proportionately. Or if you're creating an IP variant, the inventory planner variant, you could set the retail price in the system. That would be the exception case. All right. Yeah, I love how proactive you guys are. This is great. So step 2. All right. So yes, we talked about you can have nested bundles, you can have nested assemblies. Those relationships will trickle down. In terms of configuring, let's go ahead and try that actually. With that example, we have the 5-pack of shirts, we have the individual t-shirts. What I want to do now, actually, let's convert a new variant to a bundle. There's multiple ways to do this. You could also do this directly in the replenishment screen. What I'm going to do is just search for a test item in here. You can always just type directly in that filter bar. And I'm going to grab this first one and hit apply. So the first action, what is it doing? This was a variant. We are now classifying it as a bundle. Okay, so I'm going to save the change. Just moved down here. So here's our test item. And let's say for this test product, I'm going to add a component here, and I can choose if I want to either add an existing variant or an IP variant. Let's go ahead and create an IP variant. We'll call this test component. Test component. I'll say TC123. These are the only required fields I need to put in here right now. Price would be that retail price if there was one. Again, if this item lives in your system, it would be set there. And come back and we can adjust information for IP variants. For now, I'm just going to go ahead and create this IP variant so it lives in our system. And will the bundles created in inventory planner sync inventory back to Shopify? I'm not entirely sure how to interpret that question. So if you create bundles in inventory planner,
I can jump in on that if you want. So your bundle is going to be created of those components, and that's what you're actually ordering is the components or the variants. You'll have that on your purchase order. The variants can push to Shopify. As we've talked about before, you'll need something to manage what the stock level is or the availability is of your bundle within Shopify, but the components of that can be received within Inventory Planner and pushed to your Shopify store.
Thanks, Jill. Cool. All right, so here's that bundle. I'm adding a test component. There's 3 components per bundle. Again, I added this as an IP variant, Inventory Planner variant. This only exists in our system. We are not creating this product anywhere else. Just something to keep in mind. It's only living in here. If we had multiple components, no problem. Just keep adding them. Or we could hit existing variants. You could add multiple components at once. And then anything you can do here in the UI, you could also import these relationships. Our bundle assemblies article has step-by-step instructions on how to import all those relationships in bulk. And you can even create IP variants as part of that upload. So you're kind of bringing everything into the system at once and saving yourself that headache. If you've got a ton of SKUs to work with or anything. We went ahead and created that IP variant. We set up the relationship. Our system, you see that little, always keep an eye on that little button at the bottom. When you see that red button, it's letting you know you either got to refresh your screen or, we've seen tickets about, hey, why do the sales look a little strange? Well, if you configure the bundle, make sure you recompute the math because now we have to interpret the sales a little differently. So now we're going to let those sales recompute. And I'm going to head over to replenishment. What I'm going to do here, you'll notice, so right now we're in the variants view. These are your individual SKUs, your components, your variants are going to live in here. You'll notice that bundles don't live in this tab. We very intentionally did this because you're not ordering the 5-pack of t-shirts, you're ordering the individual shirts, right? So what we could do instead, the idea is you're going to be placing orders for the components. The sales from bundles are automatically going to trickle down to the components. I'm going to hit filters. This is a way to narrow down the products that you're looking at. We have a few really helpful filters. You can either, of course, see IP variants. That's a quick and easy way to see that item that we just created. Another one would be using filters, bundle components. So these would be anything these are components of bundles, right? Pretty straightforward. And you also have one for assembly component. If you really want to zone in on variants connected to a specific bundle, so say, yeah, I want to see components that are part of that test bundle that we just created. That's another way to come in here, right? So now let's go ahead and click open that details icon. Let's see what's going on here. Well, it's an IP variant. It doesn't sell on its own. That gray is all the sales that we see are from bundles. In this case, if we go to bundles production, we don't see any sales of this item on its own. Again, it's an IP variant. We don't sell it. We use it strictly in the case of bundles, but we do sell the bundle, our test product here. And so, we're actually, notice we're gonna grab the sales. Say in July, that's an interesting example, 903 units. That actually means, since we have 3 components, that means that we sold, 903 divided by 3 and then multiplied it by 3 to show you how many components would have technically sold. So it's the same as selling, quick math, 301. 301 times 3 is the same thing. So we're saying, hey, you sold 301 of this item in July, multiply that by 3, and that's effectively how many IP variants you sold. So that's what we're going to be merging down here when you look at the sales. We'll use this to produce the forecasted needs, give you a replenishment recommendation. So we're just forcing all this. And if this is part of multiple bundles, it could be part of 10 bundles. We're going to merge the sales from all bundles down to this component. Maybe this is a blank shirt. It's part of 5 packs, 10 packs, red, blue, blah, 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 20, whatever it is. We're going to grab the sales from all of those bundles, multiply it by the respective component quantities to represent it as past sales for the component and produce an independent forecast and replenishment analysis for the component accordingly. That you can then come and say, all right, based on all that together, we need to order 1535 in here. Actually, I'm going to reset my columns because we're missing that column here. There's our replenishment recommendation. Go ahead and add that item, and we can create the purchase order for the component in this case, or however many components. As part of the usual process, you'll need to associate variants with vendors so we can see that information by the time you get to the PO and the cost price. All that information should always be configured as part of this process. Now you're shipping and handling just as usual, and you can go ahead and create that PO. Now, by definition, the way IP variants work, as we discussed, we could receive it, we could save it in. If I were to go back to replenishment now, I'm going to go ahead and just quickly find that IP variant. The way that IP variants work by default is that we've now increased the stock by that amount. Right now you're wondering, hey, why is that replenishment recommendation still there? We're just recalculating. Give the system a little time. It's going to zero out here in just a moment. That's the way by definition IP variants work. It's the only case where you're tracking that stock directly in the system, unless of course you create a manual warehouse, separate concept, the IP warehouse. But basically, yes, in this case, we created the IP variant, and we're going to work on zeroing out that recommendation here soon. All right, so basically, yes, so that's ultimately what's going to create the recommendation and how we'd be able to adjust it. We can also click into IP variants. You'll see the More tab over here, and this is, maybe the reality is we have some stock to work with. Actually, IP variant, you could adjust the cost price, the vendor, et cetera. So some key attributes. But you'll actually see, if you were to go to warehouses or catalog warehouses, either way, that this would be a case where you can actually go ahead and just directly set the stock. Maybe you truly only have 1,000 hanging out. Again, this doesn't live in any other system. It's an IP variant, so you would configure that here. That would be the case with bundles. Now, configuration in terms of assemblies is the same general concept. You would grab the components. You could convert variants to assemblies the same way. Classify a variant, convert it to an assembly, then add your components. If you also are managing directly in the system, if you have bundles or components, maybe this test product I just created, is truly an assembly for customers that have that availability. Essentially, like if it's required that you need to define bundles and assemblies in the system, you would be able to quickly select them or select everything at once and see a bulk actions button to say, actually, these are assemblies, not bundles, and vice versa. All right. So that would be the workflow for bundles. Assemblies is going to be a little different. All right. I'm going to walk through that office table example. I feel it's the most straightforward to understand. Let's come back to replenishment. Now, when you do classify assemblies, this is different. Now, we're looking at component variants, but assemblies actually live in this assemblies view. They don't live in the variants view. Again, the stock is separate. We need to treat them separately. The first thing we're going to do here is we have to configure assembly times. So let's say in theory, I already had some component stock available to me. All right. I have some, then the system is going to say, hey, all right, I have some office tables and we already have 4. It's not quite enough to cover our needs. We have forecasted needs for this office table because we know it. Here's the past sales. We're producing a forecast. This is a finished good that we consistently sell. So we are coming up with forecasted needs related to this. But we also recognize the fact that there is some component stock to work with. We have 4 tabletops. We have plenty of legs to work with. This is, as of now, this is what we got. So the system is saying, oh, okay, you actually have some component stock to work with. Well, if it's going to take 7 days to assemble, today's December 22nd, that means you could start assembling 4 tables and have them together by December 29th. So we're saying the next to assemble based on your existing component stock, go ahead and produce 4 tables right now. And later, once you can get some new component stock, then assemble the rest. And if you were to open that question mark bubble, notice actually, the replenishment is the addition of what you can assemble right now, plus what you need to assemble later to meet your full amount. So we're looking, hey, if you can assemble within 7 days, you could have new tables by December 29th. Let's focus on your needs then for the following 30 days, or if this was 60 days, whatever it might be. We're going to say, why is that? Here we go. I'm going to save the changes in, so that would increase our recommendation. We still can't produce more right now. We don't have that stock, but notice the replenishment recommendation went up. So it's saying, okay, now order even, once we order more components, we have more assemblies we're going to need to produce. You'll see question mark bubble 2 there next to the components. If components have different lead times, that's fine. We're considering all of that now. These are key differences in the improvement of this design. We did not used to be able to really forecast well if you had varying lead times. Now we can. You didn't used to be able to configure assembly time. Now you can, and see recommendations for what to assemble from existing component stock. So this is why I've been nerding out, being pretty excited about the new features we've got to provide for you. So we're going to see that stock. Now let's dig a little deeper. Let's come back in. Same idea. We see the whole replenishment analysis in here. See the past sales. We see the forecast. We know what we need to assemble. All right. So now I'm going to go to the bundles production tab. And if we were to look at tabletops, 2 ways I can get there. I could either just click the details icon here and it's going to open a brand new tab and give me all the information I want. Or just like I showed you earlier, you could come from scratch, replenishment into variants. Remember that your components live in here. What I want to see right now, I want to see components that are part of this assembly. All right, that's what I want to see. I want to see my table legs, my tabletops. Notice there's already a recommendation in here, 673. You click into the details icon. I don't know if it was Mike or Greg who asked this question earlier. Notice you don't see any sales. This is something we see too many tickets about. And the reality is you don't sell tabletops on their own. It's not stopping you from getting that recommendation. What we're doing in this case, we see that bundles production tab. We say, okay, tabletops are part of large office tables, or we see all of the different assemblies that this component is part of. We're going to see how many components go into those assemblies. We see what's in stock. We see the assembly recommendation. We already configured all that because we sell office tables, and we know that we need 677 tabletops to meet that demand. So that is the stock allocated for assembly. So that's actually a column you can add to the table. So open up that gear icon. I'm even just going to put stock allocated for assemblies. All right. So you can add that right into your table. Or did I take it out? Whoops. Stock allocated for assemblies, 677. But again, we don't. So then we first said that we said we need to allocate 677 components for our assemblies. We're going to assemble 4 right away, and we're going to assemble another 673 on December 22nd when we can get the rest of that component stock, because that's how long it takes to get new tabletops based on our lead time that we've configured. All right. If this tabletop did truly sell on its own, that would be the sales that you see here. You'd see some forecasted sales for tabletops on their own, and another forecasting and replenishment recommendation based on just how tabletops sell on their own. And then we would just add those stock allocated for assemblies. You might ask when you might run into this situation. Well, something really key to remember is specific to Amazon users, especially anything that goes to an Amazon warehouse, by definition, is an assembly. Even if it's that 5-pack, 10-pack shirt example, whatever it might be, you still have to put it together before you send it to Amazon. So yeah, maybe you have 100 shirts. You don't have any 5-packs. You have to put together 5-packs, reduce from your individual shirt stock, and then send it to Amazon, right? So anything going to Amazon is by definition an assembly. Maybe at Amazon you sell 5-packs and individual shirts. You still have to put the 5-packs together before you send them there. So we're going to give you a recommendation with that in mind. And then we're also going to come up with a forecast and replenishment analysis based on how t-shirts sell on their own. That's an example where you might see some forecast sales in here that would be added. All right. We do have a question in here. We're looking to have visibility to stock being held for replacement of goods, but not sold on the site directly. Can we use warehouses to keep those replaced units tracked and updated? You can. That actually might be where you would create an IP warehouse. If you were to come to your account settings. So that features here. This is free. It's a manual warehouse where no fulfillment takes place, but it could be for production, it could be for assemblies, it could be an FBA prep warehouse. All right. It's a location where we reserve some extra stock. Any of that can be tracked there. And then you could set stock for anything manually in an IP warehouse. And then you could also additionally add a manual warehouse, that IP warehouse, into a combined warehouse setup so that extra reserve stock is considered. You can have as many combined warehouses as you want in your account. There's no billing impact. So you could have a combined warehouse that's, hey, what's my FBA, Shopify, everything all together? What do I need? And then have another combined warehouse that includes that reserve stock of components so you can view it accordingly. Does that answer the question? Jill, do you have anything you would want to add to that?
Yep, I think that sounds good. Over in the chat, I'm putting links to a couple help documents, one to specifically about IP warehouses, and then the second about combined warehouses. This can be like a whole nother topic. So feel free to drop down in the chat, set up time with us if you'd like to talk through the warehouse configuration piece. And we're glad to help you with configuring your account for that.
Yeah, I think one key thing to, when in doubt, remember that Inventory Planner is never intended to be the master of your stock information. We're always going to try to get that from another system. We're always going to get it from Shopify or your inventory management system whenever possible. We give you that opportunity to create that IP warehouse as a manual location. If it doesn't exist already in your system and you have some extra stock that just needs to be considered, it gives you that opportunity to do so. But it's, it's pretty explicit. There should be no order fulfillment that would take place here because we just wouldn't see it. We're not making adjustments based on customer sales, right? Mm-hmm. In the case of the IP variant, is that exception case, you can create that variant, that component variant directly in our system and set the stock and manage that relationship a little differently, specifically because you're creating it as a component that's part of an assembly within our system. That would be like a unique type of use case there, but it does give you that option. All right.
Cool.
Let's head back to replenishment. All right. Okay. So we got our next assembly in place. So yeah, I mean, basically the key part here, let's say the first thing I want to do as part of my process, I want to come into my assemblies. I see my large office tables. Well, I want to go ahead and just assemble what I have. This is something we can do right away. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that assembly, and then assembly order. Remember, an assembly order is a production order. We're ordering 4 tables from existing component stock. We're going to go ahead and create the new assembly order in this case. All right. we're going to see, we're using that combined warehouse to come up with our recommendation. So it's seeing more source stock because it was adding it between everything. So we're just getting a little warning here, but across everything, we have enough components, or we'd see it in our IP warehouse. So we're ordering 4 units. If I click that components button open, it's going to show us how the stock would change of the actual components themselves. So we're reducing from our component stock, we're increasing the assembly stock. So we can go ahead and create the assembly order, that's production order. We can hit actions, we can export this as a PDF and send it to our production team. We can email it directly to them. The idea would be once we actually, so first of all, let's go back to replenishment. Let's check assemblies. You're going to now see a column over here is on assembly. So you have 4 units in stock and you have 4 units on assembly. So these are in process of becoming assemblies. We're going to see that as part of the recommendation. Notice also too, that replenishment recommendation adjusted down. Now it just equals replenishment because we've already reserved whatever we have to work with. We already know we're assembling those 4. We created that assembly order. Now it's saying, okay, next time, in 14 days when you get the new component stock, here's what's left to assemble. If we were to click into that details icon, you're trying to figure out what's going on, you can always check that forecast stock chart. It's going to give you an idea. Hey, we had 4 units in stock. Well, we've already told the system, let's start assembling right away. That reduces the assembly stock to 0. And we just follow that narrative. What happens once we actually get the components? It says, oh, okay, let's go ahead and create the other 673, take 7 days. Then we're going to focus on what would happen starting December 29th in our days of stock period, just like we said over here, right? So that would be the first step, coming into your assemblies, create assemblies using the existing component stock. Then we could come back to variants. Now I want to order extra components above and beyond what I had available. So say I want to go back to my office tables, my components, here's what I have left. I need to order these components immediately. I'm going to go ahead and now I create a purchase order. So purchase orders to the vendor, purchase orders to vendors, transfer orders between warehouses, assembly orders, production orders. Something to remember, there's always 3 order types. Say we create that purchase order for the components. It's always key to set up your vendor and vendor variant relationships, cost price information, just like usual with creating purchase orders. We have shipping handling, all of that's going to be accounted for. Right. We've configured a default destination warehouse. But again, if you're using a combined warehouse, you'll always need to define where it's truly going because a combined warehouse doesn't exist. So maybe you're sending this to a prep center, your IP warehouse, so you can go and assemble it there. That's one option, right? And if you're not using an inventory management system, that might be something you want to do because that's exactly how it would work. You'd say, hey, let's order those components to this manual warehouse I've created. You could receive that PO. It would increase the stock of your components at the manual warehouse. It's the only time stock is going to shift there. And then you could even create assembly orders at the IP warehouse. And you see my hand motions here. Convert that component stock into assembly stock at the manual warehouse. So all of that can be done within Inventory Planner. Order the PO to the IP warehouse, create the assembly order to convert those components into assemblies, then transfer it to Amazon, right? So those are all different options you're going to have. So we say, all right, go ahead and create this purchase order for the components. Bang, we went ahead and did that. Eventually, when those components arrived to the warehouse, we would receive those goods into the system. And then if we're connected through an e-commerce platform like Shopify, we would give you the opportunity to increase the stock in the store. If you were to order to an IP warehouse, the manual warehouse, we would have increased the stock automatically. Again, that's the definition of the IP warehouse. You can order, you can set POs to go there, you receive it, it increases the stock. You can either assemble goods or transfer stock to another location and it would decrease the stock. It's the only time stock changes at that manual warehouse because no fulfillment takes place there. So we order these components, they eventually arrive 14 days later, we increase the stock, we go back to replenishment, we go back to assemblies. Now we create an assembly order to complete the rest of our assemblies. And then we're in good shape at that point. So this would create an assembly order then for the future because we won't have that stock until then. The system already recognizes that. So saying when we get the rest of those components in, then go ahead and assemble these goods. That would be that process there. Now, if that's too many steps and your process isn't, there are definitely cases where we see, hey, I sell maybe you sell office tables. You don't sell tabletops or table legs on their own, and you only ever need to order enough components to meet the assembly demand and nothing additional. You don't carry the existing component stock. You order exactly the components you need to assemble, and that's that. You want to simplify the process? All right, no problem. First thing I'm going to do actually is just to go back to this purchase order section. Notice how we have some different prefixes here. So these are different order types. So I was referring to this. I'm going to hit filters up here on type. These are the 3 order types. I just want to grab my assembly orders. I'm just going to go ahead and grab both of these. In this case, I'm just going to delete them out of the system. If you already pushed this to your inventory management system, you'd have to do that there. Keep in mind, anytime you're pushing a PO, an assembly order, a transfer order to another system, it's locked in our side. If you're creating the assembly orders or anything internally, then you would have that opportunity to delete it. And you can always reference this table here. There are a few systems that do allow us. So as you're creating assembly orders in Inventory Planner, you could save it over to Syn 7, for example, receive it in Syn 7 and make the rest of your adjustments there. So all of that would be pretty seamless. In this case, we created those orders directly in our system. I'm also gonna close out that PO that we created. I already received it. All right, cool. So we go back to replenishment. So we've reversed, all right? We've stepped back a little bit. So our replenishment is back, right? Here's what we need to assemble. Here's what we have. Well, let's take a different example. Let's say like the small office tables. Here's what I need to assemble. I don't really have any existing component stock to work with. I just want to order enough components. I want to keep it simple. So I can grab this item here. You're still going to configure your assembly time. You still want to configure your lead time for the components. All that's still important. But what we can do here is condense that process, consolidate it. Instead of creating the assembly order, you see that little arrow, this little drop down. Well, what I'm going to do is create a purchase order. If we had components coming from different vendors, we would actually create multiple purchase orders for each vendor at a draft status that you can go and approve. So I'm going to go ahead and say, all right, let's go ahead and use. So what are we doing here again? Just because I know it's a lot to take in. So we're here in assemblies. I'm grabbing my small office tables. I know I have to order the components and then I have to assemble these into office tables. My goal right now, just from here, create a purchase order for components based exactly on what's happening with the produced goods. So again, hit that drop down. I'm going to create a PO to multiple vendors for the components. Now I can't send it to a combined warehouse. Of course, I'm going to send it to my Shopify warehouse, but we'll use the replenishment on our combined warehouse. This is just where it's really going to go. If we turn this on, we're going to order exactly enough components to meet the assemblies replenishment. If components are sold on their own or anything, or maybe there is some existing component stock and the recommendation is a little different. If you were to look at the component variant level, you just turn this off and it would order that amount instead. But if you turn this on, it's going to order exactly enough components to meet the assembly demand. If we're ordering from multiple vendors and there's going to be several POs, we can actually use this feature to link those purchase orders together. So once we receive the PO for the components from our vendors, we know that those are all connected, and then directly from the purchase order, as you're about to see, we can just immediately create the assembly order. So go ahead and do that. Go ahead and create that purchase order. We created a PO here for components. It went right back to purchase orders. Notice it created 2 different POs at draft status, one to my China supplier, one to my US supplier. Now, I think it's from the first one that we've created. Yeah, so we'll go to that first one. Here's the table legs. The other one would have the tabletops. The first one that is created, so PO 5 is before 6 in this case. So I can go to that PO for the components. And at any point, first I'm going to go ahead and I can approve the PO if this all looks good. I can receive it whenever those components come. But directly from this PO, I can say, all right, those components came, click open the assemblies, and go ahead and just create that assembly order. Got all my components in from the different POs. Now we link those all together to say, great, let's go ahead and just quickly assemble those tables. Look at the component stock. We've effectively received that from all these different POs, and now these are the tables we're going to produce with that in mind. So we just went directly from the PO to creating the assembly order, create the assembly order. Then we receive that assembly order whenever we produced it, and that would increase the assembly stock just as usual. It's the same process, just consolidates a little bit. And then remember, since we're not going through an inventory management system in this case, I received that assembly order. Now I have the opportunity to increase my assembly stock in my Shopify store. I would also have the opportunity to decrease the component stock in my Shopify store. Because if I ordered a purchase order for components, and I received that into my Shopify store to increase that stock, even if it's a hidden component, and then I created the assembly order within my e-commerce store. So when I receive it, it's going to decrease that component stock. It's going to increase the assembly stock. So we'll give you that option to push those changes over to Shopify. Or of course, if you're going through an inventory management system, as soon as you created the PO, as soon as you created the assembly order, save that over to your system and manage everything else there directly. So again, I know it's a lot to take in there, and our bundles and assemblies article, this is going to be super useful. I've been following the workflow a bit here today. We talked about what is the difference between bundles and assemblies. How do you configure bundles? Pretty much the same process there for configuring assemblies. But the new change here, again, if you're an existing customer and you're not seeing this yet, make sure you reach out to us with that chat bubble and just let us know, hey, I want to come over to the new assemblies design. And it's going to allow you to configure assembly time at the assemblies level. That's going to be a key part of your setup with assemblies. And then we talked about forecasting and replenishment for bundles, how we take the sales from bundles, force those down to components so we can create a replenishment analysis accordingly. Talked about forecasting and replenishment for assemblies. Again, we break that down into different parts. We looked at the produced goods, how they sell, produced a forecast and a recommendation there, figured out how many components we need to allocate for assemblies. Then we do a separate analysis to say how do components sell on their own, if applicable, to figure out what else we need above and beyond that and net it out from the component stock and give you recommendations to create purchase orders for components if needed, and assembly orders to produce assemblies out of component stock. We talked about assemblies replenishment. If you're trying to create assembly orders to produce some new assemblies. Talked about assemblies replenishment. If you're trying to create purchase orders for components, these are all sections that you'll be able to find in this article. It's outlined exactly based on this. Or you want to skip right down, you understand the forecasting and replenishment piece. You're just trying to remember how to create the PO or the assembly order. What does it mean when you're configuring assembly time versus lead time or days of stock? Really good to refer back to this just to understand what was happening when you create the assembly order, what happens when you create the PO for those components. And then this one that says save time, that's the consolidation we talked about. You want to use the assemblies replenishment to quickly order those components. As soon as you receive it, create the assembly order, bam, that's your option there. And then at the bottom, we'll give you opportunity. If you are setting this up in our system, the bundle component relationships, assembly component relationships, if you have to create IP variants because the components don't live in your system or anything, you can do all of that with a batch import using a CSV spreadsheet. So check the step-by-step instructions here below, the template to bring that information into the system. And then check, we'll be continue posting different additional tips and tricks here at the bottom. When I was talking about the filters there and how to make sure you're zoning in and seeing exactly what you want to see in those tables, you'll see some useful filters down there, how that and how it impacts KPI reports. And also, there are cases where we notice too, you might say you created a purchase order for components, but you want to show the vendor which bundles or assemblies those are attached to. You're going to also see some extra options there in the PO that allows you to export that order information with the component details. So there'll be some different layers. So definitely encourage you to keep an eye on this article. And if something's not clear, be sure to holler at us with the chat bubble down there at the right. I've been talking a lot though. I'm glad I'm not seeing too many questions come in. But Jill, anything in particular you want to add? Or if you have questions, feel free to jump in here on the chat box.
Yeah, I think you did an awesome job of presenting a lot of information and can definitely be complex. So I just added the link to the bundles and assembly article that Basil was just walking through. That's in the chat now. So you can check that out. Lots of great in-depth information. There's also a short video that Basil put together there. We will send out the video recording of this session as well within the next day or two. But in the meantime, you can refer to that to help you get set up and make sure that you're understanding how the forecasting works in that situation. So with that said, I don't see any more questions popping up. So we're excited to have you dig into this. We think it's going to be a really big help to planning your bundles and assemblies. Definitely let us know what you think, what questions you have, and thanks so much for joining us today. We'll catch you on the next webinar from Inventory Planner.
I did, Joe, before I let everyone go, there's one little thing.
One more thing. All right.
One little fun extra tip. It's in the article. You'll see it there. But I did want to mention, say, if we pop open that details icon or anything, remember how we talked about the forecast stock chart? In this case, hey, we have 4 units in stock. We create the assembly order. Here's, once we get new components, here's what we need to assemble. If you're just trying to get a quick view of what would happen with the component stock, we added this option here, and it would give you forecast stock charts for the components to get a quick idea of what's going to happen with your components as part of all of this too. Just wanted to show you a little cheat because that is a really cool addition as part of this as well.
Okay, you're totally right. That is a really great point to bring up. I think it's really a helpful thing to see within the forecast detail there. So anything else?
That's it. I promise.
Famous last words. All right. Okay, so with that, we're going to wrap up. We'll send you the session afterwards. Let us know what questions you have. We'll be glad to help. And thanks again for joining us today. Bye, everybody.